Hello everyone, welcome to my new video, the Ultimate Chrome Extensions Follow Along tutorial. Recently I was developing a Chrome extension and I found the documentation to be very lacking, and it took a lot of trial and error for me to get my extension idea working. So I thought I'll create a video tutorial of all the steps that I took to create a similar extension to what I originally wrote. So in this video, we will build a Chrome extension to log in and preview Slack messages from a workspace. To break it down, we'll set up a manifest.json, we'll build and debug Popup HTML and JS, we'll add a background service worker in the Chrome extension, we'll pass messages between Popup and the service worker. We'll also create a Slack application and log into it from the Chrome extension using oauth and web auth flow. We'll also use Chrome storage to store the access tokens that we got from our login step previously. We'll then create content scripts which will read any web page and look for Slack links. We'll create a Netlify lambda function to fetch Slack conversation details from the Slack API, and we'll run it locally. We'll put together everything we learned and fetch this Slack convo from content scripts when we hover over new Slack links. We'll end the video with some tips and tricks for some error cases and edge cases. Also, I'll share all the resources and documentations I used to learn all of this. And I'll also share a link to the Git repository with all the code that we wrote in this video. So let's get started. The first file you need to know about when you write a Chrome extension is the manifest.json file. This is a construction and configuration kind of file, and it can have various details, basic details like name, description, version of your Chrome extension. Let's start with 0.1. The manifest underscore version, which is the version of Chrome extension API that you'll be using. Here we are using version 3. Most Chrome extensions in the wild are version 2, as version 3 is pretty new. But all the features are backward compatible, so we're not going to spend as much time on the differences between the versions. Other than these details, you can have more stuff like permissions, which are an array of strings. You can have action details, which is an object with key and values. Background files. This is for any job that you wanted to do in a service worker. And content scripts. These are files that you can run in the context of a tab. To summarize, the manifest.json file to Chrome extension is the same as package.json file to an npm project. You need a manifest.json file for every extension, and you can configure a lot of details within this file. To start with, we'll set up a pop-up action that you can do when you click on a Chrome extension. So we don't need these details for now, and in the action object we will say default underscore popup and provide it with an HTML file. Now we'll create a popup.html. Popup.html is a normal HTML file with a doc type, HTML tag. It can have head, body and any other HTML tags you please. In this pop-up HTML, I will create a new button with an ID login to Slack and text login to Slack, and I'll try and configure this to actually log into a Slack instance from which we will preview all our messages. So at the bottom of the body, I can add a script tag and ask for a popup.js there. Now in the popup.js, I can refer to the login to Slack button by using document.getElement by ID login to Slack, and then add an event listener to the click event of the button. Now in the click event, I can, for now, I will alert the string button is clicked. Now to test your Chrome extension, you need to go to Chrome//extensions, and you can see that there are already some extensions that I'm using. You need to enable the developer mode here. So without developer mode, certain options will not be available to you. So once you enable that, you'll see that 3 new buttons appear. You can click on Load Unpacked, which will open the Browse Finder window, and choose the folder where your extension has the manifest.json and select it. So now you can see that the Chrome extension has been loaded onto my browser. So it has the name I've given it, the version number, and the description here. The browser itself has given it an ID here, and you can see details, or you can remove it, or you can update when you have a newer version. So this Chrome extension will also be available in the extension list here as Slack preview. So if you pin it, you can see that it becomes available on the work bar. And when we click on this, our popup.html comes up with the login to Slack button. And when I click on login to Slack, I see that the alert that I configured with JavaScript is called. So it says button is clicked as expected. If you want to debug the event in more detail, or the popup.js in more detail, you can right click on the extension and select inspect popup. So what this does is it brings up the Chrome DevTools, but in the context of popup.html. So you can see the elements of your popup. You can see your popup.js here, and I can put in a breakpoint here. So now if I click on login to Slack here, then the breakpoint is hit, and I can examine the script just like any other web app. Now it's also possible to open up a brand new tab when you click on the Chrome extension in the browser. And you typically do that using the background file. So what you do is first configure a background service worker. So you have the background object, and the key is service_worker, and you give a background.js there. You then create a background.js file. The background file here will run as a service worker in the background of your Chrome extension. It can be invoked through actions or events. Here what we want to do is when you click on the Chrome extension itself, we want to open a new tab with the same HTML that we were able to insert to the pop-up. So by using a new tab, you have more real estate to show all of your options to your user. So how to get that running is by using the Chrome object. So in Chrome extensions, the Chrome object can be used to run different API that will give you some powers in the browser. So to listen to the click action on your Chrome extension, you can use chrome.action.onClicked.addListener. In here, I can call a function called openTab. Now to define the function openTab, I can now again use the Chrome object to access the tabs API and create a new tab with the URL pointing to popup.html. Another nice to have feature that we can implement is we can also run this openTab function when the Chrome extension is installed. So we can do that by using the chrome.runtime API, and it has an on-installed event. Let's add a listener to it and call openTab within that. For this to work, we'll need to remove the default underscore popup from the action object while keeping the action object empty. So let's test this. So I'll update my, so when I updated my Slack preview Chrome extension, it opened a tab automatically with the login to Slack button. I can test that by clicking on the extension. It opens the same tab. So it uses the ID and the popup.html as its URL. So here I can see that when I click on login to Slack, the alert is once again invoked as expected. Chrome extension service worker can be pretty powerful. It can listen to messages from the other parts of the extension and make API calls and such on behalf of the extension. So here, let's see how we can pass messages from the front end of the extension to the service worker and get a reply back from the service worker. So here we have set up background.js as the service worker to be used in this extension. In background.js, we have some minimal logic to open the popup HTML as a tab on install and click action of the extension. In the popup.js, we have a login to Slack button, and on click of that, we are currently alerting that the button is clicked. So if we really want to log into Slack, we need to be able to send a message to our service worker to do the relevant API calls. We'll first use Chrome's API to send a broadcast message to the rest of the extension. All of Chrome's messaging API runs within chrome.runtime object, and here we'll use send message. The send message function takes two parameters. The first one is typically an object full of data that needs to be broadcasted. So in this case, we can send a type of auth. The second parameter is a callback function that will receive a response object from whoever received this message. So let's log this response object. So right now we are only sending a message from the front end of the extension. Now we need background.js to listen to such messages on the service worker side of the extension. For this, we'll again use the chrome.runtime API on which there is an onMessage object. Here we'll use add listener. Remember, it's add listener and not add event listener. These are some subtle differences between how Chrome extension JavaScript is written and how a normal event listening happens on the browser. So here in the add listener function, it has a callback function where it can basically listen to any objects that are broadcasted by the rest of the extension. So here the first argument is the parameter object that has been broadcasted from popup.js. The second one is not very important, and third one is the send response callback, which we'll be using to send back a response to popup.js. Now inside the function we need to check if the param has type auth. So if it has auth, then we can console.log that event is recognized. Next, we can send a response with the string event is recognized. So what we can expect to happen in popup.js is on click of login to Slack, it broadcasts a message with the type auth, and on receiving a response from that, from whoever listened to that message, we'll just log the response. In background.js, we're listening to any messages broadcast from the front end, and if the type is auth, we'll send back a response saying event is recognized. We expect that popup.js this callback will lock the response string. So let's upgrade our extension with the new changes we've made to the service worker and the popup.js. So now I'll upgrade, and on upgrade it'll reinstall and open the popup. Let's inspect and see if our new changes have been applied. So in the sources, I'll go to popup.js and see that the message is being sent with type auth, and in background.js here I see that we are listening to that message. So let me put a breakpoint here to make sure that the message is sent, another breakpoint here to make sure that the message is received, and another breakpoint here to show that we are receiving the response. So when I click on login to Slack, we see that the click event is listened to, and message is being sent, the message is received on the background.js, and the param has type auth. So we get back a response to popup.js, and the response says event is recognized. So this is how you can pass messages between the front end of the extension and the service worker part of the extension. To start off with the Slack oauth, we need to visit api.slack.com. You need to log into your Slack account and create a custom application. Here your apps are listed, and you can start an app from scratch. So the name is Slack Preview, and I'll do it in the Egghead workspace. So this is the basic information on your app, and there's plenty of secrets and details here that you will need later. Now you can go to the oauth and permissions feature. Here you will need to add a new redirect URL. Back to our code base, we'll start with popup.js, and in the message we will send a type called oauth, and the response itself we'll expect it to have the oauth token all processed and ready for us. So once we send this message to the service worker, here I will listen to it and look for the type, and if it is oauth. To implement the OAuth protocol, we don't need an extra server or anything like that. We can do it completely using the Chrome extension and its APIs alone. The API that's going to be most useful for us here is the chrome.identity API. So this has a number of methods, one of which is launch web auth flow, which is going to serve our purpose. So launch web auth flow takes an object as the first parameter and a callback as the second parameter. So in the first parameter, we need to provide the OAuth access URL here, which I have written in the Slack utils object above. Get OAuth URL. And we're going to mark it as interactive true. So what this does is it lets us see an extra browser pop-up where you can choose a different Slack instance and so on, and log into it in an interactive manner while seeing what permissions you're giving to this extension. So get OAuth URL is basically a URL construction with a redirect URL, which we get from, again, the chrome.identity API, call it get redirect URL. So what this says is when you hit this URL, the Slack API itself should redirect back to the Chrome extension's redirect URL with a special code. Now that code will come back to us in this callback function as a URL, which I'll call as code URL. Next step for us would be to fetch the get OAuth access URL, to which we'll send the code URL. This operates in this manner. We send the code URL here, which is split up into its parts, and we remove the code from it and attach it to the second step of the OAuth protocol. So here I need to return this Slack access URL, and that'll get applied here in the fetch. Now in the fetch I can return back with a response, and I'll need to extract the JSON from it. And in the promise next step, I can use the JSON and log it here. Now what I need to actually do is send back the response to the popup.js with the JSON data in there. But since this is an asynchronous callback that we are calling, we need to make sure that we return true from the add listener. So to summarize, we listen to the message of type OAuth here, and on that we call the Chrome identity launch web auth flow. The first one parameter is an object, the second is a callback. In the first one we give the first handshake OAuth URL and make it interactive, and the second one we expect back a code from Slack, and here we give the get OAuth access URL, which is derived from the code along with our client secrets, and then process the response and call send response. Since this send response is being called asynchronously, we'll need to return true from the listener itself. So let's see if this works for us. To get this working, we also need to provide user permissions to the Chrome extension. We do that by going to manifest.json and using the permissions parameter, which is an array of strings. And the string we need to use here is identity. Now let's update a Slack preview app and open login to Slack. Let's open the debugging tool. We can see Popup here. Let's put some breakpoints in here and let's see if those are hit. Log into Slack. The Popup basically sent a message of type oauth here, and in the background we are looking at param.type oauth, and it's successfully identified. Now Chrome.identity is available here. So I need the redirect URL and put that in my Slack app. So to do that, I'm going to copy this address, go to my Slack app and add a new redirect URL as this and save them. Now if I continue, then I get my interactive pop-up to log into any Slack workspace. So let me log in to egghead.io. And you'll see a screen like this. So this will say that it's requesting permissions, and it'll show you what permissions you're requesting. Here I want user permissions, some channel and conversation permissions, and some info about the workspace. So when I say allow, so it comes here, and in the fetch call I can call on my OAuth access URL, and I'll respond back with my auth user and access token, which is exactly what I wanted. So when I send this response to the Popup.js here, so now I can store it in my local storage or somewhere and then use it later for other API calls. So in summary, what we did was we basically sent a message of type oauth to our background.js file, and here on listening to the message, we launched a WebAuth flow, and this executed the first handshake of the OAuth protocol, and this executed the second handshake of the OAuth protocol. You can read more about how this works in the Slack API documentation, you can also understand how I wrote these util functions in the GitHub repo that I will link with this course. Chrome.storage is another exclusive API to Chrome extensions. It allows us to store and retrieve user-specific data. It is quite similar to local storage, but also quite different in the sense that it cannot be debugged effectively or even visualized effectively. You need to add a storage permission to your manifest.json to unlock this API. There are two ways in which you can use the API, storage.sync and storage.local. Storage.sync allows you to sync the data between all logged in Chrome browser instances, and storage.local is only specific to that local instance of the browser. Well, let's now get back to our Slack preview Chrome extension, where we'll try to use Chrome.storage API to store the OAuth tokens that we have retrieved from the Slack app. So as we know, we already have a popup.js where when you click on the login to Slack button, it sends a message to make the OAuth transaction. So in background.js, we listen to this message and we launch the WebAuth flow and finally get the JSON with the relevant token. Since in this place we are trying very hard to be asynchronous, we'll not be storing the JSON at this point as there is a chance for race conditions and loss of data. So let's go back to popup.js where we'll receive the OAuth token in this response, and let's store this response in Chrome.storage. chrome.storage.local.set response. Now, wherever you need this OAuth token, you should be able to use chrome.storage.local.get and use it to make API calls. So in our case, in the content script.js, we want to have a preview of the Slack link. Until now, we've done the work to identify that our mouse has hovered over a Slack conversation link, and here we want to retrieve the OAuth token and make an API call to get the Slack conversation details, which we can preview on the website itself using our Chrome extension. What we can do is make sure that the Chrome extension is logged into the Slack app before even activating any mouse over targets. To do that, we can say chrome.storage.local.get. In the first parameter, you need to send in the specific key that you want retrieved from the storage. If you want the whole object, you need to pass in a null here and then call back where you can access the data. If this data is present, only then do I want to set up the mouse over functionality. So let's check if this works now. Let's now update the Chrome extension with our new changes. This opens the login to Slack pop-up. Now we want to check if our login is successful and the OAuth token is retrieved successfully. So I'll go to inspect the page, go to sources, go to Popup.js, and here I'll put a breakpoint at the response. Next, when I click login to Slack, I'll open up the pop-up for egghead.io. I'll allow, and yeah, so my breakpoint is hit, and in the response I have a lot of things showing that I am the authenticated user here, so the team and the name and the app ID, etc. Now I'm storing all of this data, and this data will be referred to in the content scripts according to our changes. There's no definitive way to debug where this data is stored because I could not find it in the local storage here. So it's definitely not local storage. So the only way to debug it is by doing a get on chrome.storage.local to see if all of this data is present or not. We can do that in the content script. So let's go back to our example links, and I'll inspect the sources and find the content scripts, Slack preview, and the content script. I think this is not upgraded yet, so if I refresh the page, I think we'll get the new content script code. So let me put a breakpoint immediately after load and see if that catches. So I'll refresh here, and yeah, so we have our breakpoint has set itself up at this point, but let's see if chrome.storage.local.get did get any data. Yes, so I have the authenticated user. I think a previous error also snuck in. So that's how you use chrome.storage to save any user specific data in your Chrome extension. As the next step to previewing this Slack link, we need to make an API call to the Slack app we created earlier. to be able to fetch the actual conversation details. So what I found out was that you can make API calls only from background.js, which is how we did the whole oauth earlier. But you cannot call Slack's Node.js APIs from here. So my solution for this was to create a Netlify lambda function which makes the actual API call to Slack app, and my extension will just make a get call to the lambda function to make that happen. To do this, I decided to create a new folder called extension and move all the files that I had related to the extension into this folder. Now we can only unpack this folder for all our extension purposes. Now I created another folder called Netlify, and that needs to have another folder called functions, inside which I can create a file, get slack convo.js. So this is basically the syntax required for a Netlify lambda function to work. So the concept of a lambda function is that it will only wake up the server or use server time on the cloud whenever there is an event that will make it do some work. So in our case, the event is going to be me hovering on a Slack link, and then this lambda function will be awakened to go call the Slack API. So a lambda function in Netlify needs to have an exports.handler, which is a function. So this function is the crux of the lambda function, and this will get called whenever I call this get slack convo Netlify function through a URL after I deploy it. We'll look at how that works later. So inside this function, I'll have to basically get all the Slack API params that are required, make the API call. So make the API call is mostly awaiting the API call, which means that this function has to be async, which is possible with the lambda function. And then I return the status code and data. Body json.stringify any result. So here basically I expect const result is equal to await get conversation details params. So to get the params, we need some input data. So the lambda function takes in two arguments, the event and the context. So if I choose to get all the param details in the form of query string parameters, then I basically need the oauth token, which I can choose to send in event.query string parameters token. Next I'd need other Slack conversation related details, like the oldest conversation. These are very Slack API specific terms that I won't be explaining too much in this video. You can read it in Slack API documentation. So now I have these parameters, So what I'll do is I'll send them as an object here as token oldest and CID. Now I can write any kind of functions in this extra functions to modularize my code. So get conversation details is a function. So it can be an async function because it'll make the actual fetch API call. So here is where we make use of Slack's node API, which is in a library called Slack Web API. So we get a token oldest and CID. Next, we create a new client object, client, new web client, and send it the token. Now, to get the actual conversation data, we need to results equals await client dot conversations dot history. You should definitely look up the Slack documentation, which describes all these APIs in great detail. So this requires token, it requires channel ID as channel, it requires the oldest conversation, that oldest timestamp of the conversation that I know of, and it should include that oldest one, so this, and then I only want one match. So, and then return results here, which will get returned here and which will come in here. So we have written this, but we also need to be able to run this Netlify function locally for us to check that this works without actually incurring any cost on the server, just for debugging purposes. To get this working, we need to convert this into an npm package. So npm init, so called Slack preview version 1, description not required, entry point, I guess no test, keywords author okay. So I'll install Netlify lambda as a dev dependency. And I'll install Slack/web API as a direct dependency. Now let's write some scripts so that we can start these Lambda server. build. This will build the server and this will start it. So let's try it out now. npm run start lambda. Okay, so this says no Netlify TOML found. So I'll have to create one of those as well. Netlify .toml. So this has build commands somewhat like this. You can find it in Netlify's documentation. Then, okay, cool. So it says the server is listening on 9000. So let's try it out. Localhost 9000 /function/slack convo. I think it's dot. Okay, cool. I can live with that. So yeah, so here we can see that the API was called, but then yeah, I didn't send any token or conversation information at all. So now I can test that. So let's go back to our Chrome extension. Here, try to log in so that we can pull in the token that we need. Cool. Okay, so this is the token that I wanted. So now I can say token equals this. I also need, I think this gotta be a slash here, and or channel ID, which is this. So say I picked up this. This is the channel ID here, and the oldest timestamp is, if I'm not wrong, the 3 on the 3. I think the first 10 digits, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, let's try this. Oh, it worked. Okay, so what I did basically was I got the token from the extension login itself. So this token is stored in the Chrome storage. Then I got the channel ID from the Slack link, which we can break it down in our content scripts. And the timestamp, oldest timestamp that I needed to send for the conversation details is basically this permalink that Slack created, so extracted out of this permalink that Slack created. So basically the first 10 digits of this permalink param are the timestamp that I need to send. But if the thread is longer, So if the message that I want is from a part of a thread, then I'll have to look at thread underscore ts and the first 10 digits to get that timestamp that I need. So now that I made that API call, you can see that the API worked pretty well, and it even gave me this text. So this is the text that I will basically push into my preview UI. The next step to get our Slack preview data is to send a request to our lambda function so that it sends a request to the Slack API and get back the details of every Slack link that we hover on. To do this, we need the token ID from the storage data, and we need the channel ID and the oldest timestamp from the Slack link. What I'll do is write this get param object function that'll look at the Slack URL href and split it into the required parameters for my lambda function. So now I can say param object equals get param object of target node dot href. Next, I'll get the token from the data object, which can be gotten through this line of code, and I'll send a message to the background to make the actual API call. As we learned before, background.js is the best place to be sending any API calls to your servers. So to do that, we will call chrome.runtime send message. Here I'll say type get convo. Then I'll put in my param object and token. The second parameter in Chrome runtime send message is the callback function with the response. Here we'll just print out the response for us to inspect. Great. Now we'll go to our background.js. Here I look for param.type equals get convo, and if that's the param.type, then I know that I'll have all the other tokens and parameters required for sending a fetch call to my lambda. The URL for my lambda is as we saw before, here. So constant URL is equal to this one. Now I'll pull out the parameters that I need, that is CID, oldest, and token from params. Is it params? Okay, it's called param. Now I'll construct the full URL. URL plus question mark token equals encode URI component of token plus an ampersand of CID equals and encode URI component CID plus ampersand oldest equals plus encode URI component oldest. Cool. So now we have our full URL. So we'll just make a fetch API call to the full URL, and in the then of the promise we'll get the response, convert it into JSON. In the subsequent then I'll get the actual conversation details and I'll send it through in the send response callback. Now I expect that this will come back and hit the content script and log everything here. So let's go try this out. To get this working, let's update our extension, log into Slack, allow egghead, go to our test bed, refresh the page, go to our content script, and I'll put in a breakpoint around here. So when I hover over this link, okay, this breakpoint is hit, and I have my param object which has CID and oldest. I have my token. Now the message is being sent into the background.js. So let me try to debug that here. Cool. The file is here, and the code that I just wrote will be around here. So once I release this breakpoint, yeah, this one gets it. So we get all our parameters here, CID, token, and everything. Now I'll hit on the fetch and see if I get a response. Cool. So in our convo object, we have a lot of details and some metadata and messages. And this is the text that we were looking for. So now if I release this breakpoint, we'll see that probably this got logged, and yeah, we have the response in our content script. To go back and check if our lambda function was hit, we see that, yeah, our requests were recorded here and a response of 200 was sent back. So in this part, we learned, we put together all the things that we learned before, where we sent a message to the background.js with a type and other details. And in background.js, we received the message and we sent a fetch request to our newly created lambda function, which is still in localhost, and sent back the response. In this last section of the video, I just want to touch upon some tips and tricks that will help you overcome any errors that may happen while you build this app. The first topic that I want to touch upon is that launching web OAuth is pretty slow in a Chrome extension. So once you click on this, it's better to add a loading state there, because opening this little pop-up takes a long time. Also, if you find yourself with any errors in this page, say when you allow or when you log in with your Google account, you give the wrong password, then it might get stuck in that error, and you will have to inspect. You can inspect this pop-up alone and clear out all the storage and cookies where that info is stored. This helped me out a couple of times. Okay, next, I really wanted to touch upon the fact that there is no way to actually check if this storage.local sets or not. in the debuggers and the Chrome developer tools. So if you want to debug this, you will have to do a chrome.storage.local get immediately after, since there's a callback that you can call after this to do your debugging. Next, I want to talk about this send response callback. So it's pretty fine to send the callback itself, but it can be a little tricky when you look at it on the background.js side of things. So first of all, it is the third parameter, which can be the first tricky point. The second one is when you want to send a response in an asynchronous manner, like here, we want to first launch this webauth flow, and then in its callback, you want to call a fetch, and only on this fulfillment of this promise, you want to send the response. So it's pretty much asynchronous, which is fine for background.js, but there is a little caveat that if you don't return a true in the end, that send response will be completely ignored. So basically how it goes is when a message is being listened to, it just skips through all the lines and goes for a return true, and if this return true is there, then it acknowledges any other asynchronous send responses. This is explained in the Chrome extension documentation, but it is kind of easy to miss. See here it says send response was called synchronously. If you want to asynchronously use send response, add return true to the onMessage event handler. There's more details on that here, but there is no real example that I found, so I found it a little hard to implement. Next, some tips regarding the lambda functions. Netlify requires that you have the function under Netlify folder and functions folder. This is a default convention. You may be able to change that, I'm not sure how. Netlify also requires that you have the STOML file to deploy the lambda function. Also, it will generate this lambda folder, which you are better off ignoring in gitignore, as you don't want to commit this derived code. There are other ways, but I found that Netlify lambda is the best package which allows you to serve these functions locally. Next, regarding the Slack application, make sure that the ID on the Slack application for oauth redirect URL is updated to the one here. Every time you make a change in the folder structure of your extension, this ID will change, and that could lead to errors in oauth. Also, remember to clean up the client ID and client secret so that they are not available in your repo. Once you deploy your lambda function, also remember to change this localhost to point to your Netlify instance. While the hardcore extension work does end at this point, we still don't have a full preview here. You can use any tooltip library to make sure to display the text response of the conversation on hovering. So I tried this one called tippy.js, which worked out pretty well for me. Also, we've been working pretty much with this default icon. If you want to create your own icon, then you can add a PNG file to your extension folder and update it in your manifest.json as an icon object, and that'll replace this and this icon here. Also, in the description, I'll link to the documentation to the Chrome extension, documentation to Netlify functions and Slack API, so that you can look in depth and look to customize your app even more. So that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching till the end. If you liked it and if you think it could help somebody learn Chrome extensions better, please share with them. Subscribe to this channel for more coding related videos. Bye.